The simple stone we have here, and sometimes we see simple people, simple life, and on the surface it seems like he was not a person of character or of wealth as well. And I have to say, I'm the low-key part of the thing. I'm just a historian. I don't act. I don't do the drama. But on the surface, Joseph John looks like a typical early Ohio settler. But when you dig a little deeper, you find a little bit, and you go into his life and take time to look at it, you see what motivated him. You see what actually moved him forward. Sometimes we, see desperation. Sometimes we see in the early settlers it was just a matter of survival. But he was born in 1794, most likely in Franklin County, Pennsylvania. And we don't know much about his family. In the 1810 census, when he would have been about 16 years old, he is in the census by himself. And then within 10 years, he's here in Troy. We know he came, and we believe some other families in Greene and Montgomery, the John family, also from Franklin County, were some of his kin, whether they were uncles or maybe even cousins. He did come somewhere between 1810 and 1812. Joseph R. John then served in the War of 1812, and he would have been about 18 years old, 19 years old at the time. And it's pretty amazing when you look at it because, again, 19 years old, one record claims that he was about 5'11", so now that would be average height, that would be about my height. But in that day, he would have been somebody a little taller, somebody that most people would have looked up to. And he must have been a person of character, somebody who had a strong personality or a leader, because he became at 19 a sergeant in his company. And so he served for a term in the War of 1812. And the company he was with would have been up northeast of Greenville, but he came back to this area then. In marriage, he was married 3 times. And the first lady he married was Sarah. We believe her name was Bowen, and probably married in 1819. She was born in 1796. Sadly, she passed away in 1829 at just in her early 30s. They had 5 children together. Only 3 of them lived to adulthood, and there are many descendants from that family. The second one was Harriet Neal. He married her a year after Sarah's death, and they had 1 daughter together. And then she passed away in 1851. She was born in 1801 and then passed away in 1851. The third he married was Sarah Mary Smith, and she was the sister of Ypsilanti. So that's why they are close together here. In fact, this whole line is all their family. Out there is one of his sons from the first marriage with his family. So all of this is the Smith and Joseph R. John family. The grandchildren seem to be people of character, or maybe they were people of good looks or whatever, but they seem to marry into some very well-known families in Troy and Miami County. Names of McKnight and Ross and Ellis, McKinney and Argabright. One granddaughter by the name of Ruth Baines married a man by the name of Judd Boak, who for 12 years was the mayor in Troy. So it goes on, it goes through time, and many descendants are still either here in Troy, throughout Ohio, and even across the country, possibly even in some foreign countries. He was somewhat of a Renaissance man. He was a merchant, he owned a sawmill, and then also like his brother-in-law, he was an attorney. And so you see his name through the newspapers, conducting business, administrator for estates, helping even in guardianships when there are orphans and moving along with that. But then he also had other interests and activities. With the land purchases, and I was going to mention that he bought and sold land like nobody's business. I mean, there's a list in the deeds of all the property he bought. In 1850, his real estate was listed at being $16,000, which in today's value is over $500,000. And that's just at one time. That's not the buying and selling of everything he had. So he did that, guardianship. He served on the Troy Board of Health, and he was on a committee for vigilance for Concord Township election. So even back in those days, that was in the 1840s, they wanted to make sure that things were done right. And then he ran for council. He was president of the Washington Total Abstinence Society of Troy in 1840s. And he was also the treasurer of the Benevolent Mission Society of Troy in the 1820s. It's interesting, too, he seemed to have a real care about people around him, about his fellow man or woman, making sure that their lives were healthy and cared for, thus serving on the Board of Health and making sure elections ran well. But with the soldiers, and maybe because he was a former soldier, he also cared about their families. And so in 1863, this article appeared in the Troy paper. It says, "We know of no one who has engaged with more energy and effectiveness in the noble work of assisting soldiers' families than Mr. Joseph R. John. Or a piece of his good works was his efforts to provide a good dinner for the said families on the 4th, that being July the 4th. The tables were spread in the Baptist church, and at noon a good meal. A number of people gathered around the well-furnished tables and had a very agreeable time." So he's doing these different things. He's helping other people. But there was a couple other instances I want to share with you. Isaac McCoy was a very early Baptist missionary to the Native Americans, first in Fort Wayne and then up in Michigan, and then eventually he moved out to Kansas. And McCoy had a strong connection here with the Staunton Baptist Church, with Joseph R. John and another gentleman by the name of Horatio Gates Jones. And Isaac McCoy and his wife were a couple that experienced a lot of sorrow in their children. There were 14 children born and 10 of them died. Only one of them lived beyond his parents. One of the children, Maria, died while Isaac and Christiana were here in Troy, and they were staying with Joseph R. John. Later, he put up his own money to pay for Maria's tombstone and her burial at Staunton Baptist Cemetery out near the Staunton Baptist store, the Staunton store, Old Country Store. And there's a letter in the Isaac McCoy correspondence where Christiana is relating this, and it's a heartbreaking letter to read if you can imagine losing a child. But it's that letter, then correspondence with Joseph R. John, that seems to encourage him and pick him up, that this man in Troy was so concerned that this little 8-month-old baby would have a proper burial and a stone to recognize her life. The other connection we see is that in 1846, there was an event here with the coming of the Randolph slaves, or the Randolph Free People. And John Randolph was a Virginian. He was in Congress. He was very well known at the time. He inherited slaves from his father. And then his will in 1833, he freed his slaves. And so he had arranged for them to come up here. Joseph R. John, partly probably because he was an attorney, but because he seemed to be a man who cared about people, he helped take care of some of the orphans that were among the freed people. In 1850, just 4 years after they had arrived, in his own home on Cherry Street, he had 4 of the former slaves living in his house with him. His house at one time, in that time period, was the scene of a wedding of 2 of the Randolphs when they got married.
Which 2?
I'm sorry?